Thank you. Hi, everybody. Ooh, loud. I'm Mark. It's freezing in here. My stretch his fingers because my hands are freezing. I was going to run around the room, but I'm too lazy. So I'm going to be talking about Figshare and what our ideas around data publishing charges are and things like this. The two things that you'll notice in this presentation are, I'm going to focus very heavily on we are technology. We do technology. Our opinion on policy and things like that shouldn't be important. And then I'm going to spend the other half of the presentation just giving you my opinion on what I think is important. And what should we pay for? What shouldn't we pay for? What are the things that need to be paid for? So for those who don't know Figshare, we are a data publishing platform in the first instance. So we allow any academic to come along, upload files, add some metadata, and make those files publicly available, from which you get a DOI. And there's two bits to this, because on the one hand, there is figshare.com, we call it, the generalist repository where anybody can go and upload files for free. And the first question is always, what's the business model then? How can you sustain that? And then the second part of the organization is we provide data publishing infrastructure for lots of different people. So PLOS was mentioned, a lot of the big publishers, Wiley, Springer Nature, we provide data infrastructure for those guys. We provide data repositories for universities like Carnegie Mellon or University of Amsterdam, and we provide data infrastructure for funders like the Wellcome Trust or the Environmental Protection Agency have a Figshare data repository. And so this is what I say about, there's two sides to it. We provide technology for our clients. What they need in a data publishing platform, it's our ambition to be the best at what they need. And then figshare.com is a secondary thing to that, and we can talk about what that is as well. So yeah, as I said, I'm going to say this a lot. We are software as a system. Software as a service. We provide a platform and publishers provide the policy, which is really interesting because we get a lot of questions. You know, people say, oh, Figshare does this or Figshare does that. For a large proportion of that, it's our clients do this or our clients do that, and we just support it. So one of the first things we were talking about is licenses. So figshare.com, the free platform, is it only allows you to publish a CC0 or CC BY because we can. Because it's free, and these are the limitations, and that's what we choose to allow people to make their data available under. But if you want your own data repository or data publishing platform, you are going to have, and we aim to have your own requirements. And so this is the American Chemical Society, and as you can see, they, very nicely, it's all Creative Commons licenses and some open code licenses as well. So when we talk about data, we accept any file format, and we aim to preview it in the browser. So we work with a lot of publishers to make their files look good as well. This is data that's never been seen before because I got it this morning. And so, you know, we're looking at licensing. So talking about those licenses and seeing across all of the Figshare infrastructure, who licenses what? And as I say, different people we work with have different policies. You know, different organizations have different rules because they have different funding requirements and things like this. So it's really cool to see 1.5 million objects are CC BY 4.0. But we have a lot of different licenses, and you know, it goes all the way down to, we have one object that's CC BY 3.0 for some reason. So it's an interesting mix across things, and I'm happy to discuss the different licenses and what I think is important about that. We do a thing called the State of Open Data with Springer Nature, where we survey people and say, what do you know about data? What are the responsibilities? Why are you making data available? And this is a really interesting thing around licensing, asking, this is 1,000 people who've made data available, what license do you use? And so 15% is CC BY, 64% have no idea what license they've released their data under. So this is when I say we're going to be talking about things, technology, should we pay for technology for data processing charges? We should be what is the value add from making the data available? The other thing, this is another question, who owns the data when they make it publicly available? The most interesting one here is red is before publication and gray is after publication. If you look at publisher, most people think they're giving the data to the publishers. So there's a lot of confusion here. So this is what we create. We create for publishers these data platforms. They look nice and pretty. And we visualize a lot of these files in the browser. So you've got spinny molecules or map files that you can click around. And this is really good for encouraging academics to make their data available. We also started looking now at Ipython Notebooks and some more computational things. And this is what it looks like in journals. So this is Taylor and Francis, where you can see, here's a data set, and here's a map that's changing color. So why do people use us as opposed to building their own? Because the policies are changing so fast. We're a team of 40 people, and we can't keep up with changing policies because we operate globally. Just because you're based in the US and you're funded by the NIH does not necessarily mean you're not also funded by Max Planck or Chinese Academy of Sciences. So one thing that in trying to be the best technically, we focus on things that people want to know. So there was a session this morning looking at how to encourage people to make data available and the different incentives there. And citations is a big one. We have citation counts. I can talk about citation counts. But there's also the economy of scale. How do you cope with big file sets going forward? Custom branding and DOIs and help with certification, things like that. This is an example of a data set on figshare.com. You can see we have version control. You can see we preview the file. You can see that if you're looking at impact, it's got 20 citations, this data set. It's got an altmetric score. It's got everything you need. One thing that's really interesting on the citations thing is most people cite, the things that get cited the most is code. And that's inherently because, this is a hypothesis, sorry. My theory is that people know how to reuse code. People do not know how to reuse this data set necessarily. Well, they obviously do because there's 20 citations. But I think we're going to get to a world where things are getting cited. Everyone's going to have to make their data available. Things are getting cited because you can reuse them. Like the code, if it's well described, if it's well curated, then it will be reused. And so when I say what should we be paying data processing charges for, it's for that curation. Who does it I don't have an opinion on that. It can be the librarians, it can be the funders, it can be the publishers, it could be a whole new organization. But we are technology support the way in which people can curate these files. But I think if we're going to be charging data processing charges, it should be for curation. And just to talk about citation tracking and kind of the idea of how citations are affecting, this is data on citations to data sets in generalist repositories. So this is for Figshare, Zenodo, and Dryad over the last 5 or 6 years, showing you how many citations to those repositories there are. And you're seeing that it's exploding. We can dig in and see that the people who funded those papers who were citing data repositories, it's spread. You know, you've got the NSF, you've got the European Commission, you've got Canada, Belgium, UK. So it's a global thing. Everyone's having to do this. We can look and see what areas it's happening in, but it's happening everywhere. So are we going to have subject-specific curators of data across every field? You can see that even though we work with PLOS One and the Royal Society, a lot of these people are still making data sets available in this way. And you're seeing that people are citing data from preprints. People are citing data from books. So it's happening everywhere. It's a lot of people making this stuff available. The question is, if we're going to have to curate data going forward, who's going to do it? And where is the money going to come from to pay for that? Because when you look at the actual data publishing platforms like Figshare, you can have, a fixed line in a government cost or a funder cost that says, this is our data repository. Either go and publish in GenBank, or if you've nowhere to put it, you can make it available in the Funder X repository. That is a flat line in the budget. That is not an exploding cost. The thing that will explode in cost is if you have 10 million data sets that all need to be curated in order for them to be useful. The last thing I was just going to say as well is storage. You could say that storage is going to be an exploding cost. I'd argue it's not. I think storage is going to approach zero. There are ways to do that already with decentralized storage, things like DAT and IPFS. They don't work perfectly across the globe because of data sovereignty policies. But my 2 cents for this is the exploding cost is going to be curation. So we should talk about that as a data processing charge. But technologically wise, that's not going to be a big cost going forward. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So I'm happy to note we are on schedule, and we now have some time for questions. So if you have a question, Evan, it looks like you've got one too. If you wouldn't mind, I think we can probably all hear each other in this room if you talk loudly, but if not, we'll definitely repeat the question as well. So.
Okay. Evan Owens, currently Syndeo, but 10 years ago I was at JSTOR creating the JSTOR Journal Digital Archive. So I went to a lot of archiving conferences, including data archiving, and there were some really serious issues, some of which you've mentioned and one you didn't, and I was just wondering whether they've been resolved now 10 years later. So I have 3 questions for you. The first one was, I think Carrie did mention this, is the privacy of the data. They were talking a lot about how a lot of data that had patient names, or if it was not just medical data, but if it had anything about individuals or privacy issues. So has that been resolved, and do they now anonymize the data so that it can be shared? So that was one issue. The second one, I think Becky mentioned, was about versioning, and there was a lot of discussion at that conference about not just, if it's not, what was the set of data that was archived with the publishing, but if it was part of a public data set that was a collaboration that's changing over time, are you citing it correctly, and is the data collection supporting saying this was what the data was as per cited by this article, but now it's different? So that'd be interesting to hear more about versioning. And then third question for you, which I don't think anyone mentioned, but was also big at that conference, was when you share research data to the world, it's got to be really well documented, the metadata of it, so that someone can understand correctly the data. So has that come up in an issue in all of this altered data? So just some questions about the history of archiving data.
Sure, so thank you very much, Evan. Those were great. So would anyone like to take the anonymizing question? I don't know. Yes? Would you like to?
I was just going to, I can't, is this
I think
on?
you just pull it over me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to make a sweeping statement to follow on from what I was talking about, in that there's technical problems and there's curation problems. And you can look at these 3 things you said. There's the anonymization, the privacy, and the metadata. For me, that is a human issue. Has this been checked? Is it anonymized so there's no human identifiable data? And has it got enough metadata for it to be reused? That is what you pay for. That is the curation of the data. And then the other one was versioning. Versioning is solved, yeah. We have versioning, yeah, technical thing solved, curation not solved.
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to the privacy piece a little bit, it's certainly not solved. It does very much speak to the importance of curation. There are some newly developed sort of automated methods for checking files for personally identifiable information. But there's a lot of nuance to that in terms of how much is okay, how much what combination of things could potentially identify an individual that at this point does still require a human person to intervene. And that is a big part of what our curators spend their time doing. Those can be some of the most time-consuming issues to deal with.
Yeah, for the privacy thing, there we go. Sorry. Exactly, it is a curation issue. We try to step away from that. So if we find patient identifying information, we push back to the author to see if it can be made anonymized. Not all data sets can actually be anonymized. So they can be small enough that, in fact, there is no way to anonymize effectively. And in those cases, you have to be more careful in being stringent. You also need to think about sort of the patient's or the participant's agreement to having their data shared as well. And I think Mark's point about it being curation is absolutely spot on. It's not a this is not a technology problem. This is a humanity and business process problem that maybe doesn't always have a solution.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we'll also come back. I think we'll talk about metadata here again in just a minute, Evan, but did you have a question as well? Go right ahead.
The very easy answer is yes, we do. So, for example, in PLOS Biology just recently, we allow for researchers to publish findings which have just been made. So, for example, if you have a seminal piece that went out in, say, Nature, we will allow a secondary sort of reproducibility or reproduced version of that to be published in PLOS Biology. And we do encourage that. We also encourage negative results. So, our line, at least for PLOS One, is that the most important part is that it is sound science, that the science can be reproduced, not necessarily that it's novel or that it's new. And so reproducibility is exactly in line with that. So being able to come back and say, we took the data from X experiment or Y paper and reproduced the results is absolutely acceptable, and we do take those. I wouldn't say that there is an enormous market for people who are willing to do that work. There are some high-profile examples, of course, but I would say that as a business, it's not necessarily something that is going to drive significant amounts of revenue or content for us. It's just not, I think, what most scientists are that interested in doing. I think the reproducibility angle comes back after kind of ethical issues or questions of whether the data, really did support the findings, which is, I guess, a different sort of issue in some senses. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so we have a couple back here, but we'll definitely come back. So how about we'll just go 1, 2, and then 3. Mike, do you want to go first?
Question for Carrie. Are you concerned about the longevity of the data in these availability statements? So if someone says, I'll make all my data available on this little website that I made on my lab server, is that acceptable?
We strongly discourage that, no. So having a personal web server is not okay. On the link that is in the presentation, there are guidelines for what constitutes a stable repository and what we look for. Of course, we cannot guarantee that anything in the future is going to be there, right? But we try and give guidelines to our communities to give them the best chances to figure out where would be the best place to store that data for the long term.
Great. Okay, Annette, do you want to go, and then we'll go?
Thanks. That was a great talk. Starting with Carrie, I think you could all probably address this three-part question. How are you handling pervasive error in the data? How are you handling fabricated data? And how are you handling the often sorely conflicting data bugs? Not the ones the purists, but the ones who are just out to undermine the competitor. Are you hands-off, or what are the different ways you handle those?
Wow, data thugs. I hope someone tweets that. That's amazing. I don't tweet, so.
Getting t-shirts made.
Data thugs, that's
I love it. So the first one, pervasive use. Can you give me just a little bit more what you're looking for here?
Yeah, so, you get an email from someone who says, I checked the data and there's got to be a problem with it.
Yep.
And you ask the authors, and there is indeed, a tenth of a decimal error in every single data set. That was one.
Yep.
Then you get an allegation that it's fabricated, so you can't even track your data sets. And the last is how to handle these learning barriers. I don't get the
Okay, I'm going to leave the thugs out. So for the pervasive one, yes, we do have policies in place where we will actually go back and look. Now, as you point out rightly, some of it is not worth the investigation. So sure, you're off 1/10. We do have a commenting system on our platform that then allows the authors, if they choose to do so, to say, there's been an error, it's 1/10, or particularly where you've stored your data in a repository like Figshare where you can update to a next version, certainly that's possible as well. So we do have mechanisms in place to deal with those. For the fabricated, absolutely. We have an ethics group that does look into this, and we consult with our editorial board members to review the data, and if it's found to be fabricated, we do typically follow up with the researcher when possible and retract papers, not just the data, but the paper associated with it as well. And Mark, do you want to talk about data thugs since you were so excited?
I don't know what a data thug is. What is a data thug? We're getting to...
Somebody takes a data set and reruns a bunch of analyses to look for something to support their theory that findings were wrong. So they have a foregone conclusion, they run a bunch of different analyses, and they say this cannot be possibly wrong.
I think...
Notorious for p-values as an example.
I think this falls into the category of what is the current status. So it's like the, what happens if there's a paper that has fraudulent activity in it at the moment. It'd be really good to look at the data and see if this is actually, have you made up the data? If the data's not there, we have no idea. If the data is there, we can at least start looking at it. So if somebody is looking at your data in the open and saying, I'm rerunning it and I'm finding something else or I'm finding something different, that's great. That's self-correcting science that we don't have right now because the data is not available. So, I mean,
So, yes, that's the
more data thugs.
That's the majority of people who are doing something for the good of science, but there is a group of people who are not doing something for the good of science. They're doing something to drive their own interests. And they're literally applying a different method, appropriately or not, to expose flaws in data, to undermine a researcher who's a competitor or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're going to run into it.
We're a member of the COPE, Publication Ethics, and so there's that side to it, but it's I think, the EPA stuff recently about, climate change stuff, I think, we're starting to see people use open data for bad, but, the other thing here is, what if there's a data set on, smoking behavior in children, and we shouldn't make that available because, Marlboro are going to pick it up and use it to help their advertising to children. And it's like, Marlboro are probably already doing that, and they've probably spent a lot more money researching that. So I think the edge cases in here have not become too problematic just yet. But it's a new space.
Okay, I think we've got one more back here, and then Evan will come back to you.
So I was going to ask if you have any hope that increased peer review of data in the journal is going to ease the curation burden. So if you have reviewers and editors looking at the data, is that going to make curation easier down the line? Is it not going to have any impact?
I would say that sounds like nirvana to me. I'm not entirely sure that's going to happen. Just speaking honestly, when we talk with peer reviewers about looking at data, they need a lot of guidance on how to actually properly review data. If you imagine the n number of different types of data and presentations and so forth and so on, being able to effectively train every reviewer on how to appropriately peer review that piece of data might overwhelm any efforts of curation. So I guess the question really is, what level of curation is appropriate? Does it necessarily need to be like to the 20th decimal point instead of the 18th decimal point, to use Annette's point. I wouldn't say that we can rely on peer review necessarily alone to do that. I do think it could be helpful. I don't think it's the solution alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain checks that are most appropriately done by, repositories or journal editorial staff, having more to do with, are the files there? Did they provide their code? Are there human subjects? Does it meet copyright? Those sorts of things. And that's separate from what you would ideally want the scientific reviewers to be looking at, which would be more about scientific validity and does this support the claims that are being made in the paper. And those, like librarians and data curators and dryad curators are not going to be qualified to do that sort of evaluation. And peer reviewers are not going to be qualified to do the sort of evaluation that, dryad curators do. So it's sort of figuring out how to make those things work in concert and smoothly and handing things off at the right stage and communicating appropriately amongst all the parties. Those are the real challenges.
Sure, Evan, do you want to? We'll take one more after that, and then I think we'll have to.
That's come up more recently. I'm on the chorus I'm the co-chair of the technical working group, and I'm also on JATS. And the question that's come up a lot is how data is cited by authors in the articles. And so I'm curious if whether you solved this or not. The problem is that right now, if you just track the references in Crossref, you don't know whether the author is saying that is the author's data or is it someone else's data that the author reviewed as part of their research. And so the funders are asking us on Chorus, to have the links to the research data that they funded, not other data. So if you've got authors citing correctly on this, is this solved now in the community?
I can talk a lot about this. Yeah.
And
that was unanimous.
It's on our last analysis of those 35,000 citations to data, 1 in 7 is in the reference list, 6 out of 7 are in the abstract or the methods. So you need full text access to all of the papers. We're at a publishing conference. If we can get full text access to all of the papers, that would be great, and that would solve that problem. But and John is waving the Make Data Count, which is an organization trying to do just that, right?
Yeah. So it's an organization in the sense that it's a collaboration between DataCite, California Digital Library, and Data One. It's led by Sloan and more. And the whole point is to raise the awareness around these issues. Data citation is actually a really publisher issue. It's not just an author issue. And there are currently implementation guidelines available on the Crossref website that offer 2 different implementations. One is in the reference list, but another is in the related work section of it. And one, based on what approach publishers take, you can offer more context to resolve some of the issues that you're bringing up.
So if you need anything in the JATS XML, please let us know.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll update the standard to support this.
Yeah. Okay, we had one last question here, and then I think we're going to have to head. Did you want to?
Yeah.
Sure.
Grace Bates from Friggin' I wanted to pick up on Mark's point about researchers or people know how to reuse software and code, so they are, but they don't necessarily know how to reuse data. And my question to the panel is that a technology issue, as in they don't have the tools to do it, or is it a knowledge issue, or a bit of both?
I'd say it's a behavior issue. I know that was meant for Mark, but so I come from astronomy and astrophysics, and they actually work quite hard on documenting the data with metadata to describe units, and the level of curation is ridiculous, but it does actually make the data very reusable. I think it's a lot of work, and I think a lot of people don't really understand how much work can be involved in that, and then what the ability of services like curation services can actually help in providing guidelines.
Yeah, I'd just say, I mean, if you think about, for those who were academics before, when you're saving your files as use this data 12 or whatever, .csv. You're doing it so you can understand it, and it's all in your head and you understand it. It's only, and a lot of people have that with the code that they write, it's only when they have to make the code available that other people query them and say, I can't use this. So that has already happened in code. It needs to happen in data, and whether it's through checking or through funders shouting at them or through publishers shouting at them, or through I'm being incentivized that I see that everybody who writes up their data really well gets loads more citations, those stories will come soon enough, then everyone will be like, oh cool, I can get more citations and more grant money because I mark up my data properly.
Yeah, so all of the above. All right, well, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank the panel. So, and we'll do one last stretch and we'll just wave goodbye. So, see you all later.